Week 1 in the books. I'm having a ridiculously long day at work, but I told him, you guys gotta wait. I gotta give Caesars League a recap. So excited to dive in. I did just realize that Caesar's not even in this league. He got demoted and he's just still the commissioner and still facilitating everything. It's incredible. The dedication y'all have to this league with the relegation rules is awesome. Definitely my commissioner would just dip and cancel the league and delete the website. So with that being said, wanted to dive in. I know that there is a little bit of a side bet between El Grenas and El Captain in their matchup, which was fascinating, but we're going to save that one to the end because that was also the best matchup, and I usually like going by biggest blowout to closest game. So let's get it started with Team Banditos against Paco Libre. To remind you of preseason rankings, Paco Libre was listed at team number 7, whereas Team Banditos was listed as team number 3. So looks like a miss to start off because Team Banditos gets crushed 142 to 85. Not even close. I do want to say before we even get started, which we already did, but I do think people overreact to week 1, although I do think you learn a lot in week 1. So I do think there are some good takeaways, and that's what I'm going to be really focusing on in the week 1 recap is what I think we learned about teams, not things that we already knew. So Paco Libre, we talked about the top of this team really having high ceilings, and there's a lot of talent there. But you also saw the reasons to be slightly concerned. I think ultimately, you have a good bench in Kamara coming up, but until then, you had some weaker players on your team that I had some question marks about. Dalvin Cook, I thought, would start off actually stronger than what we saw, but it looks like Breece Hall was the better running back. So I'm curious if Dalvin's still going to command those carries in the way we thought he would the first half of the season. Drake London, exactly what you'd expect. Maybe not a 0, but that offense I'm super concerned about. I'm sure he'll have games where he just gets a good amount of targets because that's just the way it goes. And I think actually Ritter literally after the game said it just depends on the game pace. Sometimes, someone like Pitts and Drake could be the guy. Sometimes it's someone else. I just think it's not a reliable start. Then also DJ Moore, another talented receiver on a bad offense. And there's reason to also see concern with him. And then also you started the rookie on Seattle, which I'm actually surprised about because I think there's just too much unknown, especially with DK and Lockett over him. So with that being said, obviously I have concerns about this team still, but you made me look stupid. You got 142. A lot of that is behind McCaffrey's long touchdown run and Mahomes with a pretty solid game that accounted for 50-something of those points. And you must have had an the defense kicker also combined for a ton of points. And Tyler Algier had a good week, but these are not guys that I think are going to be doing it consistently. I think for this team to be good, of course, Mahomes and McCaffrey, those are your consistent guys, but you're going to need more ceiling plays between hopefully Dalvin showing you some more potential. DJ Moore is the only guy from that wide receiver group I see showing potential. And then, of course, you're going to be getting Kamara back, and I think it's going to come there. But that wide receiver group, too much to work on right now. So I'm going to stick with saying that I have some doubts about this team, but of course you're going to be able to steal some wins with such a strong quarterback and running back as you currently have. On the flip side of that, Team Bandito is a team I was high on, guys that I thought would produce better, didn't as much. And let's talk about if we think that's going to stick. So Jalen Hurts, 14 points. You don't need an expert, even if I'm not saying I'm an expert. You don't need an expert to tell you that that's not overly concerning. Jalen Hurts is still going to have a good fantasy season. Maybe not as good as last season, but he's going to have a good fantasy season. You had a good week from Diggs, and I think you're going to get that all the time. The obvious flags here are T. Higgins, 0 points. By the way, I had T. Higgins, and I had Joe Burrow. Total 3 points for me. Still was able to get the win though, but that's just me. T. Higgins, 0 concern. Very basic routes that they were running in Cincinnati. I think it must have been because of Burrow's calf. I don't think that's going to continue to be an issue. I think they're going to figure it out. Bad weather, division game. Let's throw it aside and see what T does next week. James Conner, Kenneth Walker, you expect them both to be solid. I don't think these are great ceiling plays either, especially with the other guys in the backfield for Kenneth Walker, and especially with the offense that James Conner is in. But will you take 10 to 12 points, which they got you? I guess maybe. I mean, I think there's better weeks necessarily ahead, but I also believe that these are guys that you're going to expect to see in those low teens on average. But the good news for you is you have a ceiling play in Jalen Hurts, a ceiling play in Stephon Diggs. I still think T. Higgins has a high ceiling as well. And of course, Saquon Barkley also typically will give you a better week. So you have 4 guys that I think are going to produce better that just didn't produce this week. So again, I'm not so concerned about you. The only other thing to note here is Kirk is now the 3rd receiver on that offense behind all the options, including ETN and Ingram, he might be the 5th target. I think he's still a proven target. He's going to get involved, but I really don't feel good about him as a weekly starter either. So that really is the only hole I see. I hope for you Watson comes back and proves to be the guy everyone anticipates him to be. But I think this is still a really strong team. My prediction is Bandito still is going to finish above Paco Libre despite an insane blowout in week 1. The next biggest blowout, and there were actually a good amount of blowouts in this league. 3 of the 5 games are just absolutely insane blowouts. And you know what? I might have done the math wrong. I did do the math wrong. Wow, I saw Bandito's at only 85, but we actually had a bigger blowout in Sons of Chaos and the Chairman. The Chairman putting up 210 points. 210 points. After I rated him 9th out of 10th, it did give a B-. I did say QB questions. That's why I'm not smart, guys. That's why I'm not smart. Tua with 40 points. I actually do have Tua in a couple leagues. And I will say, I'm surprised I said QB questions, but also I'm not, because there were questions. Is Tua going to go back to what he was after the very odd season that we experienced? And the answer was obviously yes. And you obviously made the right call, and you're obviously smarter than me when it comes to fantasy football. I'll pump the brakes on that one. Just by casting, the only shed of doubt I'll say on this team is in Najee Harris. I think Najee Harris was one of the lesser good picks in the league, but you did enough other good things that it's really probably not going to end up biting you too much in the ass. I think I could say that here. So again, the positives here, Tua clearly is going to be your QB the rest of the season. Just an absolutely incredible option. Jacobs, despite a slightly weaker week, he was the guy, 20 carries, 20-something touches. He's the guy, so I'm not concerned there. Jefferson shows he's still the same. Ayuk gives you the best week you could expect. My fear with Ayuk is how many options are in that offense. So we're going to see if it keeps going. He got 8 targets, which is a good amount, but he caught all of them. So if he could do that every week, obviously you're going to be super thrilled. Terry McLaurin, we didn't anticipate to have a strong start given his toe. Kyle Pitts not on a good offense. So I think those are all not shocking. And you have Jamal Williams on your bench in case you need that depth. I think there's a pretty well-built team the more I'm looking at it. Aaron Jones did better than I would have thought, despite the slight injuries. So, for the Chairman, I think you walk away from this week saying, damn you, Najee Harris, but to everyone else, I love you. I think this team is going to be able to be very competitive this season, but I still don't think it's the best team in the league for that reason. I think there are still slight holes. When you get deeper at wide receiver, you get deeper at running back, I see slight holes, especially as Jamal is only relevant for another couple more weeks. And then after that, your bench is one of my least favorite in the league. So the Chairman, I like you. I like you a lot. I think 2 is huge for you, but I don't love the depth, and I do think that we're going to be seeing a little bit of regression to the mean. Sons of Chaos, you had a good week, but you weren't able to get the win. Very unfortunate for you with the Eckler injury. He probably would have kept going. Probably wouldn't have given Kelly as much action and would have made your running back group as good as I really see them being. But Eckler, Pollard, I think season long is going to be great for you. I hope Eckler could remain healthy for you. Because you have such a strong running back group, you have to assume it's a weaker wide receiver group, and that is what we saw. Unfortunately, a lot of those risky guys didn't really pay off here. Godwin really showing that is not an offense you're going to want a wide receiver option in. DeAndre Hopkins, kind of similar. You got 13 targets. That's amazing. He shows he's the wide receiver one. There's no doubt about that. But the ceiling is obviously way different than it was earlier in his career. So that's also something to be kind of down about. And Waddle, another guy, he gets banged up. Very frustrating. He is on an explosive offense. You could tell he's going to have his weeks, but Tyreek is probably the better option there. We'll see what he does. This is a really interesting team. There's a lot of guys that you also paired up Rachaad White on Tampa Bay, and Rachaad White was one of the 2 running backs, I think, that got every single touch snap in the red zone. That's great news for you, but he looked really bad, really inefficient. So just still some question marks around this team, but for me, I think there's enough to say that I like this team. This is another game where I'm going to say I like rest of season outlook for Sons of Chaos slightly more than Team the Chairman, although I think the Team the Chairman is really up there also as a really strong team. So I think these 2 teams are fairly similar, and I'm curious to see what Sons of Chaos does, given Brian Robinson's emergence also as the RB1 in Washington. Does he get to start over a guy like Rachaad White? We're going to have to wait and see on that one. The third blowout was between Pain Train and El Profe. El Profe, only 90 points. One of the weaker weeks, and before I even clicked on it, I already knew that Joe Burrow was going to be this guy's quarterback. I'm not concerned at all about that. I think there's actually more to be kind of positive about if you're El Profe, because I think Bijan Robinson looked absolutely incredible. I already, where did I rank El Profe going into this season? What is El Professor's name? El Professor, where is he? Ranked him an A-. That's a great rating by me. Wow. Man, yikes. Oh, Travis Kelce's injury. That's why. Thankfully, that's why. Yeah, I mean, for El Professor, obviously, without Travis Kelce, you're in a little bit of a hole. You lose your positional advantage there, and you think you have positional advantage other places, especially against this team in Pain Train. That running back group was not looking so good. You have a injured Breece Hall and a new Jahmyr Gibbs, but still, you get outscored at the running back position. Very unfortunate for El Professor, and obviously, the weakness of El Professor is at wide receiver. Devontae Smith, Tyler Lockett, Dotson. Only guy I like as a starter is Devontae Smith. So. Very tough week if you're El Professor. The path forward is also a question mark. Who are you going to go with at wide receiver to pair up with the guys you currently have? Devontae Smith is obviously a start. Do you give Michael Thomas a look? Potentially. You also have Anthony Richardson on the bench who's showing to be a fantasy reliable quarterback, but I think you still have to go with Joe Burrow. So El Professor, obviously, I'm a little bit lower on the team than I was going into the week, but I still think you're going to be getting Kelce back. I think that's great. I think Michael Thomas might be worth a look. And then I think this team's looking a lot stronger with Joe Burrow going back to normal. I talked a little bit about Pain Train's running backs. That's still my concern, but Breece Hall, man, he showed to be the RB1, and he looks absolutely incredible. It was obviously a lot of it was on one run or two runs, but ooh, I dropped my AirPods. Hold on. But, oh, man. That probably could have waited. But I think for Breece Hall, he's the better running back, and I think that they're going to expedite his ramp up, especially without Aaron Rodgers. We need that talent. I'm a Jets fan, as you know. Breece Hall, we need that talent on offense. I think Breece Hall is going to become a better fantasy option for you than I initially thought he would earlier on in the season. I always said great second half of the season option, but I think he's going to now be more valuable first half. Very similar story with Jahmyr Gibbs. Jahmyr Gibbs looked like the better back, but like I expected with Breece Hall, very little usage. Monty was clearly the guy in that first week. Everyone watched that game. I'm very high on Jahmyr Gibbs second half of the season, so hopefully that is expedited as well, given how good he looked. Wide receiver is where it gets really pretty for this team. Calvin Ridley, an amazing week, great pick. Davante Adams, I actually am more reassured after this week. I was lower on him coming into the season, and I anticipated what we saw. I anticipated the 12-ish points, especially against a really good corner in Denver, in Pat Surtain. I think ultimately Davante Adams, though, looked really good, and he still got 9 targets. And in a week one game with a new quarterback and against an incredible cornerback, I think that's actually great news for you. I think Davante's still going to be good. He looked really good, and I ultimately am higher on your team going into next week than I was before. It's another bench that I don't really like, and when you look at tight end being Waller, who's now having a consistent injury, and a flex in Herbert, who had to share a lot of that action, it gets a little bit concerning, but I think ultimately for Pain Train, you get a big win. I think you're looking a little bit better than what we anticipated, but I still do have those questions at running back. Then we got close. We're not going to talk about the premier matchup yet. We will talk about Untouchables over Team Crucifier. Untouchables. Did I go? No, El Grenas is the team I hate. Okay. Untouchables, 151 to 139. A much closer game. Where did I rank these teams? Untouchables was, oh no. Please don't say bottom. Where's Untouchables? Oh, they're Captain Corrupt. Okay, good. Captain Corrupt was my 4th overall team. Good pick, Rick. Good pick. Okay, so 151 points. And this is without Justin Fields having a good week. So I think there are some areas for concern, but let's talk about if it's going to be for the season. Justin Fields, no, I'm not so concerned. We know he's not a great thrower. And also, I think it's good for you that he didn't have an effective game through the air, because they really just need to unlock Fields and say, just run. That's what you need in fantasy. And right now, and they talked about this on Part of My Take, I don't know if anyone listens to it, but they're really trying, there's like a cycle with these quarterbacks. And I agree with what they said on Part of My Take, actually. I thought it was astute. You start off, he's not doing much. He starts showing his athleticism, being incredibly athletic. But then because he's so good, the coach is like, we need to protect him. We need to make him throw it in the pocket. But that's not who he is. And then it goes back to, okay, let him lose. I think we're going to go back to that, let him lose. And I really think he's going to have a good fantasy season still. And again, coming into the season, I was slightly lower on him than most other people. But I still think he's a great option. And now that people are starting to, well, at least my friends are starting to be like, Fields sucks. He's not the guy. At least in fantasy, I think he is the guy. Derrick Henry split some of the carries, but I still think he looked good. I'm not as concerned with the split with Spears as others. I didn't anticipate him to be the same workhorse that we've seen, because he's now in his 28. I think he's 28 or 29 even. Maybe turning 29 this season. But I think he still looked good, and I still think he's going to be the guy and getting the valuable carries, not concerned. J.K. Dobbins' injury, unbelievably bad luck for you. I thought this team was much better rounded, obviously, with him. I don't think Mostert's really a good plug in there. Gibson's not really relevant there. So your only option really right now is Javonte Williams. I think Javonte Williams throughout the season will become more relevant, so I think he is the guy. But man, you had a really good situation. You really didn't have many holes on this team, and that's why I like this team so much. That J.K. Dobbins injury hurts you. I think you're going to be able to work through it, though, especially with such a strong wide receiver group. I'm actually pretty high on this team. I also wouldn't give up on Goddard just yet. I'm pretty high on this team. I think Untouchables is still a top half team. I'm going to stick with that call. Team Crucifier was the team I ranked last, and they actually had a decent week, but because I need a win, I'm going to say that I'm right in that they lost week 1. So great call, Expert Rick. I do think Crucifier, though, had a better week than you'd anticipate. A lot of that was behind Travis Etienne. Looking pretty good. He did lose some work to Tank Bigsby, but still looking pretty good. And David Montgomery obviously showing to be more of a prominent option in that offense than I think a lot of us would hope, given how good Jahmyr Gibbs is. So I think ultimately your production came pretty consistently across your team, which is rare. I think a lot of the other teams saw 1 or 2 guys driving it. I actually thought you got pretty consistent production across the team, and it's another team that I guess I'm just gonna keep where I rank them. I obviously 139 is good for a team I rank last, but I'm going to keep them where I ranked them. I'm not going to say they're by far the worst. And I said this before. I don't think anyone butchered the draft, but I do think this is going to be a team that at the end of the season is going to be outside looking in for guys like what I was just talking about, for reasons like I was just talking about. And then you get add Deebo Samuel to that list, another guy that's on an offense with just so many options that I'm not. I think I said in the preseason recap, I'm not high on him, and he showed that at least in week 1 that he's going to at least start under projection. So that was my take on that team. The last game was the $100 bet, El Granas, El Captain, $100 worth of drinks whenever they want. And of course, it's between 2 teams. One team I feel very strongly about, El Granas. As a person, despise him. As a fantasy owner, I have some respect. And that you saw that in the preseason ranking. I put him at number 5. El Captain, I did put at number 1. It was a 1-point game, so devastating. I still love El Captain. Obviously, the Josh Allen thing was devastating. The way it ended, the 4 turnovers, mystifying on every level. Obviously, I watched every play as closely as possible being a Jets fan. We know that Josh Allen is like this. It was worse than we've seen very recently, but I'm still thinking that he's going to be a top 3 quarterback in fantasy this season, so I would not hit the panic button at all just yet. A guy I warned preseason I was low on, Dameon Pierce, had a very concerning week. That's the only RB I'm concerned about on your team. Obviously, I think Chubb, 22 points is what you're going to expect and what you're going to see all season. Sorry, your flex is Cam Akers. I'm also very worried about him given the split with Kyren Williams. So you need one of those 2 guys between Dameon Pierce and Cam Akers. I'm obviously way higher on Dameon Pierce than Cam Akers. I think they're completely different tiers. You need one of those guys to make sure that they get the production. I'm guessing it's going to be Dameon Pierce. Just stable production at RB2. He probably will have the usage to do that. So I think you're going to be fine at RB. And that wide receiver group is very intriguing. CD, I think, is going to have much better days ahead. I think DK Metcalf and Mike Williams are going to be wide receiver 2 options. I mean, I don't think they're going to give you crazy production week over week, but I think to pair up with CeeDee Lamb, it still makes it a better wide receiver group than a good amount of teams in this league. And when you have a running back group that I'm still high on, a quarterback I'm still really high on, I think you're still in good shape. Of course, the Tucker San Francisco defense is a classic team that prioritizes kicker or defense, drafts them way earlier than everyone else, but I think it's going to work out for you. I think San Francisco D will be good all season. I think this team is still one of those teams that I'm going to rank. I'm going to rank them high, and I'm going to stick with El Captain. I'm totally riding that out. I'm not changing my opinion there. El Granas, I did say was a top half team. I think you performed probably similar to what I expected. 110 isn't necessarily a great week, but obviously a lot of that's behind Lamar Jackson not doing that well. But you get reassurance. Stevenson got the usage you're hoping for. Miles Sanders got the usage they're hoping for. I don't think either played necessarily great, but I'm also not concerned with either of their roles. So a running back group that I like less than most other teams, at least you still are going to get stable production. Lamar Jackson's disappointing game, Jamar Chase's disappointing game. It's all pretty disappointing, I think is the right word. But what's really disappointing is Garrett Wilson is going to be taking definitely a step back with the Rodgers injury. I think he really could have been a top 3 quarterback, so it's unfortunate, very unfortunate that he is going to lose one of the best quarterbacks in the game. I still think he's going to be obviously very startable. Still think he's going to be a good option. Still think he's going to have a good fantasy season. But Jamar Chase, Garrett Wilson as a combo was just the most beautiful thing in the world. And losing that's devastating. You also lose Deontay Johnson for 4 weeks. So El Granas wins $100. They win the matchup, but they do take a step back in my rankings for sure. I think I'm going to go back to rooting against you. I will say I think James Cook's in for better days, so I think he's going to be worth the starts. I hate to give tips to a guy that I despise so greatly, but I do think El Granas is still in the mix. I don't think it takes a huge step back, but definitely bad luck. I think if you didn't have that bad luck, this team really could have emerged as a favorite. So that's week 1. that's my thoughts. Definitely feel free to talk shit. I don't really look. It's hard to follow the chat, so I'm gonna ask Caesar to summarize if anyone talks shit, just so I could make more rivals, or if anyone gives me compliments, so I can start rooting for those teams. If I'm wrong about anything, if there's anything I missed, please do point it out. We're gonna get more and more in depth throughout the season. We're gonna form attachments with certain teams. We're gonna form rivalries. We're gonna form very strong opinions, and we're gonna have some fun. So best of luck next week. I will talk to you all then.